So hello again. I hope you all have nice lunch, even those online. So we will start with our afternoon program, and our first presenter is Dr. Attila Melegh, who is going to speak about migration and migrant turn. Attila Melegh is a sociologist and historian. He is an associate professor at Corvinus University of Budapest and a founding director of Karl Polanyi Research Center for Global Social Studies at the university. He's also a senior researcher at the Demographic Research Institute at the Hungarian Central Statistical Office. His current research covers comparative demographic attitudes, discourses, demographic structures, international migration, and global social change. He has taught in the United States, Russia, Georgia, and Hungary. He's a steering committee member of the European Network of Global and Universal History. I'm very glad that we can welcome you here in person. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And then, okay. And then I should speak 30 minutes or something like that. Okay. So it's a great privilege to be with you. It's so good to be with you in person, with those who are online. It's so good to be with them online, right? I think this hybrid is going to be, it's not just in post-colonial migration identities, this hybridity, but I think in reality we are going to be very hybrid all the time, right? And what I'm going to talk about today has got this title, and on purpose. Actually, it's not just migration and market turn, but it's a migration turn and a market turn at the same time. So two turns at the same time. Because I think that all the things you have and we have been talking about previously, all the excellent work on care work and care migration, especially the anthropological aspects of that and so on and so on, it needs to be contextualized. Sometimes I have the very bad feeling that somehow we are not working too fragmented, which means that we are not making some connections which are very important to us. And also very importantly, we miss a historical approach. A historical approach which gives the dynamics. So the question I'm asking myself is that we are talking a lot about commodification. Do we see in the global tendencies things which are going to slow it down or even promote it? Is this going to be a migration and market turn for a while or forever? Forever meaning long term, right? So don't misunderstand me in that sense, but the longer run. Is it going to be a trap? And as I started with social history, I find it very important to try to answer it, at least to give some analytical points. I'm not going to answer it fully, but I will try to give some analytical points. Now, the first thing I wanted to show you that I'm just finishing a huge work now. And in that, I analyzed World Bank documents for the last 30, 40 years. And there is a very clear thing, what I could read out of that, which reminds me philosophically Georg Lukács. Namely, what I could read is that more and more migration is, I'm using the term of Lukács now, reified. What did he mean by reification? It's a very Polanyian concept, actually. The two guys were talking a lot in the 1920s. Reification is, what does market society do in the consciousness? How consciousness is marketized. That's reification. And one thing I could clearly observe, analyzing, I don't know how many articles, a large number of articles of the World Bank, that more and more migration became an abstract market category with very abstract market thinking. And that, I think, is a very important historical development. because it seems to me that this is a rather novel phenomenon in the longer run. So what does it say? I just wanted to show you a beautiful piece of that. Actually, Özden Çağlar is somebody whom we should be absolutely grateful, because he produced the migration matrices, right? So he's the guy who put together some of the most important UN databases, right? And then this is what you can see here, is that it is mainly through migration that Asian labor can support aging populations in the developed countries. Some policymakers and economists suggest that outsourcing and international trade can help move a large portion of the economic activity from the north to the south as the labor force shrinks in the former. However, there is a large range of non-tradable services. This is going back to the talk of this morning of Christina and Petra as well. Non-tradable services that cannot be outsourced or traded and need to be locally supplied. Among these are healthcare, household services that will especially in high demand as the populations in the north age. So, the point here is that in case you look at the discursive sphere, you see a lot of market dogmas, you see kind of an argument, very strong arguments, that free movement assures the best utilization of labor capacities, right? A very extremely liberal economic claim, right? Key approach is it is becoming since the 1980s. So, while labor and especially care work is becoming more and more, don't misunderstand my word, embedded here means just as the other thing. Embedded means here disembedded, right? That how the market embeds these things into the global migration market. What are the specific historical material factors? And I think we need a Marxist and a Polanyian analysis in order to understand the dynamics of historical development. Brigitte did quite a lot out of this already in the morning. And I'm not going to repeat those points. I just would like to say that we need to extend the Polanyian analysis to some Marxist spheres as well, in order to understand not just the political economy, but to understand the historical dynamics. And then I'm going to talk about aging, stagnation of redistribution, failures of the state, the final collapse of peasantry, increase of inequality, and the rise of income, which, this is going to be the conclusion, leads to further marketization. So my point is the following, that this marketization is not just happening because we have already a huge capitalist sector which is pushing that. This is already a good enough thing, but it seems that humanity is, due to this interaction between this sphere and the social historical changes, we are accelerating this. Sometimes we disregard this. We think that this is coming from outside, but I think everything comes out of history, so we need to understand why it's becoming so strong. Also, very importantly, at the end I will talk a little bit about these ideational factors. The market model is totalized. We have pro and anti-migrant blocks which are born, and workers, and most importantly, the humanization of labor are marginalized as ideas. Now this is what Lukács talked about. Now the next couple of theoretical comments. One is, of course, Polanyi. I would like to add just to the very good talk of Brigitte in the morning is that, of course, it's not just care, but education, science, social media, and all these things are also becoming fictitious commodities. We know it very well, we experience it, and I think we have to keep that absolutely open. Then here is something, Lukács is rarely quoted nowadays. I found it actually a little bit appalling because philosophically he really grounded a lot of things for the coming century. And then here it is what he's talking about. What is at issue here, however, is the question, how far is commodity exchange together with its structural consequences able to influence the total outer and inner life of society? That was the question what Lukács asked. That's perfectly Polanyian question as well. And a kind of a question we are also trying to look at. So this is why I thought it was very important to talk about. Then I would like to draw your attention to a very recent book I'm reviewing it at the moment, of, I don't know how to pronounce him, so Friedrich Jobke. I mean, for me it's Jobke, but might be in different languages, it might be different. So, and then he's also making, he wrote a big book now on neoliberal nationalism, which is a good book. I can recommend you reading it. And then this is what I quote from his analysis concerning neoliberal rationality. This changes the focus of liberal economic theory from market-limited exchange to universalized competition, right? So this is not anymore an economic thing, but this universalized competition is actually swallowing the whole human life. The result is Homo economicus, who is not only an entrepreneur, but very importantly, this is the Austrian case, an entrepreneur of himself, right? It comes actually from Foucault. By the way, he's citing Foucault here. Living out of no sphere of his life, right? So it's something very important that we need to analyze things in this way. Then I would like to draw your attention to another point. I'm not going to read it carefully. I also recommend reading this. This is an extremely good Brazilian sociologist, a good friend, Ricardo Antunes. He wrote a very good piece on the meaning of work, and then it's actually written from the global south, very importantly. And then he is talking about that there is a new polysemy of work, and this is what we have been talking about, and I will keep that in mind. This new morphology and multifaceted labor relations which are emerging, right? And that's very important. I'm not going to repeat all the things which have already been told, right? I just want to show it to you. Biao Xiang, he just gave a talk 10 days ago, and then he started introducing a concept. Biao is well known because he wrote about migration infrastructure, right, in case you can recall it. And now he's the head of the Max Planck Institute in Germany of social anthropology, right? And then he started talking about reproduction migration to secure schooling and care and quality life via out-migration from China. So actually he was reversing the whole thing. It is not just the classical care migration problems of sending and receiving countries, but when sending countries actually start using global market in order to satisfy reproductive things at home. And this is what he said, this is China now. Let's listen, he's going to come out with this very soon. Of course, I'm not going to read things like Parenas. Also, Nancy Fraser is to be mentioned here. And very importantly, fictitious commodity, which we have already heard. And also very importantly, this is one of the reasons why I'm here, right? Because Zuzana and Petra have been doing a very good paper, and I remember that vividly. One is, what is the position of, in between countries? That's very important. And very importantly, at the end, I will come back to this dialectic relationship between commodification, marketization of society, and migration, right? Is it really dialectic, or we should actually think about that? These were the things. So, when I speak about these things, then basically what I'm going to do here is that as a contribution, not as a critique, but as a contribution, that let's have a look at this from a macro-historical perspective. And let's do it globally, right? With so much focus on Europe, and still this global sociology is so much missing. And we need to make these connections. And then what major processes make this marketization, including the marketization of care work, a major tendency globally, right? Let's look behind. What can be some of the key factors of that? Now here comes the first things. Of course, the first culprit in this is actually the opening up of the economies to the movement of capital. That I think is very important. This has already been mentioned in the morning as well. And then we have just finished with a colleague of mine, we have just finished, and I hope it's coming out very soon in English as well. We have started a huge modeling on emigration. We modeled 77 countries. And we modeled them historically. How change in certain factors influence changes later, right? And then we made out of a model out of this. And actually, we could nicely demonstrate that behind rising emigration rates, one of the key factors is the increasing role of foreign direct investment. We could see it in the morning. This can happen directly, right? So that capital comes in and starts organizing bodies from different parts of the world, right? But this can be also an indirect process, how it was also originally understood. This is the process of uprooting, right? And then this relationship is significant with a time lag. That's also something which is missing in this analysis, that people tend to forget not to make historical analysis. You know, it takes time. So foreign capital comes in, it's not going to produce something tomorrow, right? It takes time. And we need to do these things. And then we could see that this effect of foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP, if it is changing, then in 5 and in 10 years, it is having a rather huge impact on emigration. So the original idea of another scholar, Saskia Sassen, is well proven, right? Which is, I think, very important. So increasing freedom of capital is a disembedding thing, right? That's very important. Also, very importantly, this increasing emigration is increasing number of transnational families with care problems as well, right? That we also need to take into account. Now, let's move a little bit to Eastern Europe just in order to focus. I did it for other regions as well, but here it's going to be a comparative thing. Now, don't be frightened because of this graph. This graph with the horizontal axis is actually the role of the FDI in the GDP, how open the economy is, and the vertical one is actually emigration rate, right? And then one thing which was striking, this is what you need to look at, this line. This is the global linkage. Eastern Europe, right, is absolutely above in terms of openness, both openness, emigration openness, and also in terms of foreign direct capital. It's well above global average. No other region, even Latin America, is more nuanced in this respect. Eastern Europe is super globalized. Of course, there are many things behind that, and one is, of course, the European Union itself, which is, you know, completely institutionalized market, free market, in a lot of ways. But other reasons are also important, and that, I think, is something that we need to take into account when we are trying to analyze, and as you did, the internal exchanges within Europe, and then how Eastern Europe comes into this picture, right? The only thing I'm warning is that Eastern Europe is very special in this respect. Okay. Now the next thing, which is of course the big thing, when we talk about the family, the state, and the market interaction in human society, then we have to see that there is a major secular tendency of the disappearing peasant society. Peasant society with its special care system, with its special household economies, special relationship even to market, is actually completely declining. From a European perspective, it doesn't look that terribly interesting. Nonetheless, I would like to throw your attention to one thing, just in brackets. Eastern Europe, as opposed to many areas of Western Europe, even in feudalist period, for a very long run, it had no servant system. So as opposed to, let's say, England or Northwest Europe, where life cycle service was included even in feudal times, right? Eastern Europe was completely family-oriented, and it basically did not know this kind of a service that servants go to other households to work, right? Which means this is an extremely familiar society, and in the memory it is still there, right? And then we have just finished the peasant societies 60, 50 years ago, right? Which is something. But globally, this is actually now being finished, right? The last part is really South Asia. Latin America is actually completely disappearing as well, declining dramatically. And, Africa is, of course, remaining there. Now, one thing which we found And then I think it's a very important factor. So in the long run, humanity, since the Neolithics, is for the first time in a situation when there is no massive householding system in the economic and social reproduction process, right? This has never been the case, right? This is what we need to pay attention to that, and it's a major factor. Of course, I'm not idealizing this, so do not misunderstand me, right? So the last thing I would like to do is to idealize it. The only thing I'm stating this as a fact, right? When we did the modeling, we included this factor into the model, and we found actually a very interesting thing, that emigration rate is not negatively related to rates of agriculture, I mean in terms of the local economy, but positively. And that's a very interesting. So those countries are sending large number of migrants outside. In Eastern Europe, it's Albania and Romania, for instance, where the economy was not changing in the, let's say, in the 1990s so quickly that it could absorb the decline of the industry, right? The decline of the industry happened, people lost jobs in a massive scale, and then they had two options, to go outside or to go to the unprofitable agriculture. And they did both because the shock was so big, right? So that's something I would like to pay attention. This makes, because Eastern Europe is always treated homogeneously, but that's misleading in a lot of ways. Let's say the Central European area, Slovakia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, are very distinct in their development as compared to, let's say, Albania, Romania, and so on. They are not the same stories. Okay. Now, one more thing which we generally forget in the case of analyzing rising migration rates, a very important factor is actually the rise of per capita income. So per capita GDP, it's very important. A lot of people talk about globalization. One of the key things about globalization that we had a massive increase globally, a massive increase of per capita GDP, right? Why is it important? You know, we all know it from migration theory, because it increases migration capabilities amazingly. And it's a very important factor. Now, what is important here, what you can see, and how to translate it into other analyses, is that, first of all, this is the behind the, so what you can see behind this is, for instance, China. So the so-called rising middle class in China and India is a super important factor. And then the participation in migration is becoming extremely important, right? This has been an amazingly big change in the history of humanity, what happened in the last 40 years. We are talking about around 600 million people changing radically their positions within global society. Now, this also means that there is, up till now, I'm not talking about whether the economic crisis is coming or not. I have a bet that we cannot make this as it is going now. It's going to change very soon. But I don't, you know, nobody can make a bet for the future. Nonetheless, it's a very important thing that up till now, a major thing was that increasing demand for care services could be financed, also because economies were really growing rather rapidly. So cash for care services, you need increasing incomes for doing this. Plus, very importantly, that was the way how they could manage, and this is going to be the next point, how they could manage the neoliberal agenda of keeping redistribution rates low, right? So the big thing about globalization up till now is actually that the increase of the economy counterbalanced for many of the neoliberal things which we have seen, right? Okay. And this is what I wanted to show you, right? When I was putting this together, then I was tantalized in a lot of ways. So what I did is the following. I started putting together the tax rates and the so-called social contribution rates of the economies. What is a tax rate? Is what you pay to the central government, right? I mean, corporations and so on, individuals and so on. Or you have the social contribution, is this, you know, what you pay into pension schemes, right? This can be private, not necessarily public, right? Plus, very importantly, of course, we know that globally there's an enormous inequality concerning this. But what I put together is this, how aging is being financed. I started thinking about that, right? And then I could see that, you know, this is a very simple base index of the whole story, that in the beginning, you know, aging was going up. This is the global tendency. You know, in Europe, it's much worse, right? The situation is, of course, much worse. And then you could see that this is the redistribution rate, right? In the beginning, actually, till 2005-6, so it's going up, and then it started, you know, going like this, which I think is a major problem, because this is what we are talking about. Aging is something to be financed by the families, by the individuals, by the state. I mean, it has to be financed, because aging is costly in a lot of ways. Very importantly, this is what we talked about this morning, in terms of health costs. We are consuming our lifetime health costs just before we die in a couple of years. So it has to be really very strongly financed. And then this is what I started thinking about, that aging is accelerating even globally, but there is no parallel increase in redistribution. Of course, you can, this, because of the growth of the economy, it is not so visible, right? In case there would be no growth in the economy, then it would be much more visible. One more thing which is important, and how it's related to migration in various ways. Of course, the answer is very clear. This is why we have the symposium here, that there is an increasing demand for migrant workers to counterbalance some of these gaps, right, which are emerging. But we also need to take into account that state redistribution, state services, found to be, in the 2010s, there were some very serious Gallup surveys about why people would like to migrate. And the most surprising thing which came out of this survey was it's not income which is actually the most important factor. The most important factor is how they perceive the local state services, right? So the global south is actually also trying to solve something concerning the change, you know, the collapse of the peasantry and the non-existence of state services. And then one of the ways how they try to solve it is, of course, migration. Migration, of course, which in that sense, you know, it's a very important thing. We talked about it, globally very important. It pushes you toward market solutions, not the social rights, because the European Union is very special. I mean, globally, these pensions, let's say, how it looks like from Latin American immigrants, it looks completely different, right? As compared to other regions. So that's very important. Now, if there is a lower level of redistribution, then it is pushing toward market or familial solutions, right? But I think whether families can participate in this more extensively, it depends very much on what we talked this morning, on the labor market. So the labor market can be the mediator between these things. How does the labor market look like? And you know, the flexibilization of the labor force, the irregular contracts, how they are spreading and so on, makes actually the labor market from the point of view of so whether you can organize your family life beside the labor market in order to take care of the elderly is getting more and more complicated in a lot of ways. So that, I think, is something very important which we need to talk about. I still have 5 to 10 minutes, no? 5?
I was going to show you the sign.
Oh, yes. Never ask, because you always get the worst, right? Okay, cool. I try to be quick. Now, this is Eastern Europe. And then this is with the same figure. Then you can see one more thing. Also, very importantly, we know that behind emigration rates, one of the key factors, even in Eastern Europe, is how neoliberal your government is. So the Czech Republic and Hungary, Bola and Greshkovich called it embedded neoliberalism, because these countries actually tried to provide certain services again and again. They never managed. Don't be frightened. But as compared to the Baltic republics, or as compared to, let's say, Romania, or not to say Bulgaria, much better, right? So one thing is that these redistribution rates play a very important role, but anyway, Eastern Europe is doing very badly, even in terms of European comparison, right? So what is Eastern Europe is actually why it's super globalized or super neoliberal in that sense is all these things together, including redistribution rates, right? Maybe this is why we are having these research projects here, in order to understand these things, right? Okay, now I try to be quick, and here is one more tantalizing figure which I found globally, or made me think seriously. Here you can see, so this orange line is the growth of the economy, per capita GDP. And then this is, health expenditure, right? So besides having an economic growth, we have an amazingly quickly increasing, globally, increasing health expenditure per capita, right? And it is actually faster than the economic growth, which means that there is some kind of a gap here, right? I mean, in case we put everything together, right? And we don't do a specific analysis, then we can see this. Now, how can we finance this, right? How we are going to finance this difference, right? Once again, this is a macro thing, so do not misunderstand me. I'm just asking, in case we put everything together and we use it as an agglomerate, then there is a gap, and then we have to ask this question. And then we also know that the redistribution rates are not going up. Actually, they are stagnating or declining, which means that the state's participation in this is actually declining. I think this can be some kind of a very important factor or major drive behind further marketization. Because then basically everybody has to rush to the market in order to secure extra incomes for that, right? One of the things which we never talk about for COVID, but partially we could, I mean, the amount of money we are privately paying for health testing and cost and things has increased dramatically, right? In many countries, they block down their health services and then you have to pay. So the COVID is actually making this whole situation much worse, right? Also, very importantly, this we know from qualitative studies, which Dora was also doing, these health care problems, not just social care, health care problems actually sends people to do care work outside, right? Because there's a health crisis in the family and they are unable to finance it, so they need to get extra revenues into the whole story. This is, I wanted to show you the increasing pressure on one thing which is very important, once again. Up till the 1990s, 2000s, there was something which even most European countries enjoyed, the demographic dividends. The ratio between the working age population and the supported population was actually improving. For quite a time already in Europe, but now all around the world, with the sole exception of Africa, actually these demographic dividends are gone and we are going negative in this respect. And then, these neoliberal agendas and the need to finance the market actually is making these things much more difficult. And then I come to the conclusions. I just wanted to say that depopulation can be also a very important factor in further marketization, right? We have not faced the key problems of depopulation, but it is massive, especially in this region. I just wanted to show you how it looks like. It's beautiful, no? These are the East European countries, right? This is 1990, right? It looks like a, I don't know, tie, right? Okay, so it goes down, right? Okay. Now, very quickly, do I get another 3 minutes? Okay, very quickly. I think that in terms of historically speaking, maybe we are in a satanic meal, right? Which is going to produce more marketization, which is going to produce, because people are going to try to make, you know, market activity more intense, further migration, further financialization, further private capital. The neoliberal states and the governed societies, whether even if they want to change it, they are pushed into this. I don't want to go into this. We can come back to this discussion later, right? So there is a historic moment in which any kind of a direct intervention, demographic intervention, for instance, my government is famous about that, it's not going to change this situation at all. And then, you know, the big question, and this is, I'm just repeating, the question of Brigitte, what kind of a double movement is going to prevail? And I show you one more interesting graph, right, which I put together. You know, there are two types, we never talk about, we're always happy about the double movement, right? Oh, very good. But, you know, there is a nationalist double movement, which we are seeing massively, and the other double movement we see very little. I just wanted to show you one thing. I put this together for my book, and this is about anti-migrant attitudes. You know, very funny, migration is going up. Globally, the negative attitudes, in case I use one survey, the negative attitudes are not changing. This is one of the surveys which was repeated for more than 30 years, right? This is the value survey. And I use that. And then you can see this. Also, in Europe, overall, the anti-migrant attitudes were not going up, right? Even during the refugee crisis, right? It's very important. One region is the opposite, right? This is, you know, this is the low countries is Latin America and the so-called West. So that's it. There's one region which actually showing, so when we are talking about commodification, further migration swings, East European population is the, globally speaking, the only one which is becoming really harshly anti-migrant as opposed to other regions, right? And then, of course, we can hope in the other double movement, maybe not in Eastern Europe. And thank you very much for allowing me this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Attila. It was a little bit gloomy conclusion, but hopefully this will not discourage you from the discussion. Actually, by my fault, I let you talk a bit longer, but still we have some time for discussion. Let me check if there are any questions. For those of you online, you can put your name in the chat for the question.
I have a question for education.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go back to the graph?
I'm going to pass you the mic.
Which graph?
I mean, there are many I would like to have more explanation on, but the crazy one about Eastern Central Europe, where the lines also go backwards, where you talked about the global connectedness.
Yeah, the Eastern Europe is the most globalized.
Yeah. Could you explain that again?
Yeah, I explained it. Sorry, I explained that. Okay, I explained that. Okay, is it out now? Right. Okay. So
Can you put it also
it's there
online? Yeah.
Okay, just very quickly. So this is the rate of FDI as related to GDP, right? This is my country, right? This is a 9-year moving average because it goes up and down, right? So it's a very volatile thing. And then this shows that how it is changing between, in this case, between 1980 and then 2010, right? This is how it goes, right? And it also shows the emigration rate, right? This is the emigrant stock as related to the sending population, right? So then you can see that in Hungary, actually, this super globalization could happen without extreme rise of emigration rates, as opposed to, let's say, I think this is Albania, in case I recall it properly. Yes, it's Albania. Albania is showing something very different, right? It starts from a very high emigration rates as compared, and then, you know, actually the foreign direct investment is not so important. Is that a good enough explanation now? It's basically two variables put together in order to show you the historical tendency. That's all. But we did the modeling, which means that I'm safely can say that it's a very significant. It's a good relationship, right? So we could see that globally for 77 countries, the emigration rates are significantly linked to the rise of FDI 10 or 5 years before, right? Okay. Sorry for the complicated graph, but that's one of the things that in critical sociology we rarely do, but I keep on thinking about these things.
So Brigitte would like to ask the question. So if you can, Jakub, put her online.
I would like to ask a more theoretical question. What is your way to combine the Marxian and the Polanyian perspectives? I lost it a little bit in the presentation. And the other question is, from my perspective, it's a really important task and work you have done on the historical tendencies, and it's convincing that we will have a stable tendencies of marketization in this sense, but we also have a powerful actor, the state. What do you think about the role of the state in these historic tendencies?
Very good questions. I wish I could answer them thoroughly. The first thing concerning why I'm saying that we need a Marxist analysis as well. My point is simple here. The Great Transformation is a very important book for all of us. So Polanyi, in that sense, double movement and so on, it's super important. But the historical dynamic analysis is I think, so most people misunderstand. The real Marxist contribution to social science was this historical dynamic analysis, which said that we need to integrate consciousness into the material processes, see the linkages, and see how they evolve together. And then without actually, ideologically moralizing it, right? It's very important. This is why I think this outcome is very much a result of multiple processes in consciousness, in discourses, in material relationships, and so on. The coexistence of this needs to be analyzed. That's the historical analysis, right? In my understanding. The second point you're asking is whether the state is able. The state is captured in two ways. The states are paralyzed in a lot of ways. Because why do we have so low redistribution rates? Because they are competing for investment. So it's one of the things that the states can't do is that they are not trying to please investors in terms of lower redistribution rates. Plus, at the same time, they can have, social expectations, so they are in the double trap in this school and corruptness they are trying to maneuver in between. But also very importantly, and this is the thing, but you know better than me, actually, and you have analyzed it beautifully, how the state is actually, that was your question in the morning as well, is opting more and more for the market solutions, right? One thing is because of solving this trap. They don't want to maintain costly redistributive systems in a lot of ways, and they're trying to move out of this. But I think that I don't see that the state is actually doing this counterbalance. And even I have questions whether it's able to do it. But Brigitte, I would love to listen to you as well, right? But how you see this, because I'm a little bit more pessimistic about this than others, because I think states are continuously opting for a marketized version and not the other things. Not to speak about, you know, investors are also trying to do things. For instance, the Romanian healthcare reform, right? Just 1 or 2 years ago, when the state actually, instead of maintaining a state redistributive system, started giving to private medical care services exactly the same amount of money like to the state hospitals. So they were marketizing it like crazy. So I'm really pessimistic in this respect.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Yeah, once again, I have comments and not questions, and sorry, but I think it's interesting for the discussion. Thank you for those points that the Marxist and historical perspective is so important. Like, because carers, migrant carers represent what Federici would say, this new subject of the primitive accumulation, yeah, like pure labor power, but without protection, yes, because most of them work informally and so on and so on. And like in the case of living carers, it's like totally like dispossessed life from the private life even. And when I did like life stories interviews, with these people, like what your mother was doing, what your grandmother was doing, and so on, we can clearly see that in order to be able to have this kind of new dispossession, transnational and so on, first dispossession of the peasants needed to be done. Like it's like a process, like clearly you can see it in one family, like first, the communist state dispossessed the peasants from smallholders in Romania, and like recruited violently them to the collectives, like commodifying labor. Then women were and working class dispossessed during the transition, and they were like positioned discursively like carers, not workers anymore with the protection. And then from carer, but like in the family, only carer to transnational carer, there is like not a big way, yeah. So it's like super really historical process that we can like make like an archaeology from peasantry to this transnational caring regimes nowadays, yeah. But I wanted to like. I don't know if I understand well that you said that in Eastern Europe there was no service, and it's like, for example, in Poland during the wars, it was like a super important institution for social reproduction. It was ended by the communism.
I start with the second one. I was talking about an earlier historical period. Sometimes these patterns matter a lot. In terms of household formation and family formation, historically, Eastern Europe was not based on service systems. That's all, right? So we are talking about the early 19th century, 18th century, and so on, right? So there is no historical tradition in that sense. Only capitalism brings that in to the picture, right? So when Polish servants went to Germany, right, and then they got this special law from the German state, let's say, I think it was 1912 or something like that, and so on and so on. So that was just a historical point. The first point you made is absolutely relevant and very important. But once again, we have to be careful in the analysis. So yes, several dispossessions have been going on, and the very last is happening in this neoliberal era. Concerning the socialist countries, the situation differed. Romania was maintaining, yes, it was maintaining forced collectivization for quite a long time. Poland never did this, right? Very importantly. Hungary followed a very different route in this respect. And actually, in Hungary, there was a very Polanyian mixed economy in rural Hungary in the 1960s and 70s, when market, family households, state planning, state redistribution actually made a kind of a safety net around people, and they were maneuvering in that. They were dispossessed out of this, right? So those market activities, people were doing it. So once again, we have to be careful. Market activities are okay in case it's not capitalistic market, right? So once again, we have to take Polanyi seriously. So market is to be contained. This is one thing what Polanyi is saying. And the other thing is that it should not be a utopia that it can swallow everything, right? Which means that we need to have some control over that, right? So that's very important. So market was operating, but people were completely dispossessed. That was the story, what I wanted to say. This Marxist point that why foreign capital is so important in this. Foreign capital is, in that sense, pushing the economic structures in a way that it disembeds people. And let me make one thing sociologically very clear. What I'm analyzing here are the structural historical factors. This is the stage. How people individually or as social groups get on the stage, it's another sociology, right? And I don't want to go into that in that sense. So it's very important to make this careful distinction. I was just talking about the structural things. I was not talking about how actually individuals, social groups actually act out, how they behave in these structural factors. That's another sociology. I hope it was clear.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for the presentation and for the discussion. And I'm sorry, but once again, I a bit did not watch the time properly. So I suggest that we come back at 2:40 to allow us some break. So sorry for those online, but 2:40 we will start with the Pecha discussion with representatives of NGOs that works with migrants.